You would think that being a juror on the Game Awards would require you to review and cover in a meaningful way the games that you're responsible for nominating. But for the Game Awards, that may not necessarily be a bona fide requirement. The Game Awards announced the nominees across 31 different categories on November 13th of 2023. In a year packed with amazing video games from beginning to end, I was a little curious to see how these nominees and the categories would play out. Needless to say, there were definitely some surprises, and for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on the Best RPG category. Baldur's Gate 3, Final Fantasy 16, Lies of P, Sea of Stars, and Starfield. All 5 of these games were nominated for Best RPG. When I looked at the nominees at first glance, I thought that everything was just about right, but then as I thought a little bit more on it, I realized that something was missing: Hogwarts Legacy. So I went back through all the other categories that it would have made sense for Hogwarts to be nominated in, and nothing. Hogwarts Legacy was absolutely nowhere to be found. The game that per various reports is the best-selling video game of 2023 that brought in over $1 billion in sales has been completely and negligently omitted from the Game Awards. So I got a little curious. Since sales clearly are not a factor here, I had to wonder if the review scores had anything to do with this. So I started looking around, because I totally understand, like, for Hogwarts Legacy to not be a part of the Game of the Year conversation makes sense. But Best RPG, like it's a solid RPG to begin with, right? So, but for it not to be there at all was a little perplexing. So if you look at Starfield, for example, Starfield currently is sitting at an 83 on Metacritic with a 7.0 user rating, and Hogwarts Legacy is sitting at an 84 with an 8.5 user rating. Baldur's Gate 3 has a 96, Final Fantasy 16 has an 87, Lies of P has an 80, Sea of Stars has an 88. Hogwarts Legacy scored higher than 2 of the 5 nominees in the Best RPG category. So based on this, it doesn't seem that review scores were a factor here, because if they were, then clearly Hogwarts Legacy would have and should have and could have replaced any one of the 2 other nominees that it scored higher than, Lies of P and Starfield. So let's just address the elephant in the room. If it's not the review scores and if it's not the sales, then could it have anything to do with the anti-trans rhetoric that has come from J.K. Rowling for some time now? Well, for that to be a factor, that would imply that there is and or was some sort of bias in the selection process at the hands of the jurors. So this got me thinking, how does the Game Awards choose the nominees, and more importantly, who does the choosing? So I went ahead and looked up the list of the jurors, and if you go to the Game Awards website, you can go ahead and find exactly everybody that they have on their jury panel, if you will. This is where things start to get a little interesting. Knowing the list of jurors that were involved, I then decided to see how many of them actually decided to cover and or review Hogwarts Legacy. And here's what I found. But first, I want to make it abundantly clear. I am not here to attack any one of the jurors' decisions to or not to review, play, or cover Hogwarts Legacy. I am not attacking their reviews. I'm not attacking the jurors themselves. I am here to attack the process. Out of the 24 US-based jurors, 14 of them did not review the game. Out of the 10 that did, 2 of them wrote some pretty damning reviews of the game that could be construed as having punished the game because of JKR's anti-trans rhetoric. If that is the case, then 2 out of the 24 American-based jurors failed to be objective in their review of the game and punished it because of J.K. Rowling. So I got some questions. If more than half of the jurors did not review Hogwarts Legacy, then how are they even allowed to be a part of the jury? How are they allowed to have a hand in the nomination process? And if we were to look at the jurors' due diligence across the other different categories in the Game Awards, would we find the same level of disparity that we have found here? So I dug a little deeper. I wanted to see the kind of coverage that the 14 jurors that did not review Hogwarts Legacy gave to the other 5 games that were nominated in the Best RPG category. And what I found is indicative of a process that has absolutely no checks and balances in place. Only 2 of the 14 jurors that did not review Hogwarts Legacy actually reviewed all 5 of the nominees in the Best RPG category. That would be Easy Allies and Kinda Funny. 1 of the jurors of the 14 that did not review Hogwarts Legacy did not review or cover in a meaningful way any one of the 5 games in the Best RPG category. That would be Entertainment Weekly. Gamertag Radio, Pride.com, and Variety only reviewed 1 game out of the 5 nominees in the Best RPG category. Lies of P was only reviewed by 3 of the 14 jurors that did not review Hogwarts Legacy. And on average, these 14 jurors only reviewed 2.5 of the 5 games that were nominated for Best RPG. So let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. How did the rest of the jurors, all 24 of them, do when it came to actually reviewing and or covering in a meaningful way the 5 games that were indeed nominated for Best RPG. And when we look at the jurors, here's what we find. 58.3% of all jurors did not review Hogwarts Legacy. We know that now. 12.5% of all jurors did not review Starfield, yet it got nominated having scored below Hogwarts Legacy. 45.8% of all jurors did not review Lies of P and Sea of Stars, yet Lies of P got nominated even though it also scored below Hogwarts Legacy. 41.7% of all jurors did not review Final Fantasy XVI and Baldur's Gate 3. On average, only 50.7% of all jurors reviewed each game. The jurors that did not review Hogwarts Legacy only reviewed 51% of the games that were nominated in the Best RPG category. In other words, they only reviewed 2.5 of the 5 games that were nominated. Out of all the jurors, each juror only reviewed 61% of the nominees. This translates to 3 of the 5 games. So for the most part, when we look at the entire list of the American-based jurors, they only on average reviewed 3 of the 5 games. That means 2 of the games got nominated without being covered. And so I started wondering, what is the process? How are they actually selecting the games that get nominated? And this is what happens. They are sent a ballot by the Game Awards to all these different people on the jurors, and the editorial staff for each one of the jurors gets to answer and pick their nominees and their winners. For example, the Best RPG ballot is empty, and they're going to write down, each member of the editorial staff is going to write down their answer. The 5 most common answers get nominated for that given category. If there is a tie, then a 6th game can be added into the category, which makes me wonder if that's what happened with the Game of the Year category, because there are 6 in those. Lies of P was nominated for Best RPG, yet only 3 of the 14 jurors that did not cover Hogwarts Legacy actually covered Lies of P. Let that sink in for a moment. So what this tells me is that Lies of P got nominated in a scenario where 11 of the 14 jurors that did not review Hogwarts Legacy didn't even review Lies of P. Now I know just because they didn't review the game doesn't mean that they didn't actually play the game, but the reviews here serve as an important point of reference. It would help give us perspective on their decisions to or not to nominate a given game. Though Lies of P is indeed a good game by all means, it basically begins to look as if the game was nominated into the category to keep another game out of it. Now I have no issues with games media personnel taking stances on any sort of social issues at all. They're all human too, and that's perfectly fine. But my main concern at this point is the integrity of the selection system at hand. All of this leads me to believe that the jury and selection system in place at the Game Awards is broken, or at the very least, not yet fully refined. Oddly enough, when looking through the different rules on the Game Awards website as to, how the votes are split up, you'll find that they use a blended vote, which means that 90% of the vote goes to the jurors and 10% of the vote goes to the fans. This is how the winners are selected for each category. The explanation for why they use that style of voting makes a lot of sense, so I'm not here to argue that. But what I am here to argue instead is, since the jurors get 90% of the vote, what criteria, if any, is there in place that they have to meet in order for them to be on the jury? If they get 90% of the vote, then how can it be possible that they can't even review 90% of the games nominated? Now, I understand there's a lot of games that come out every year, and this year was no exception. As a matter of fact, I may even dare say that this year was more challenging in regards to those that review the games for a living, right? But still, if you're 90% of the vote, and you can't even review 90% of the nominees, how is that allowed to happen? And how in the world does Entertainment Weekly, Gamertag Radio, Pride.com, and Variety get to even be a part of the jury when they barely reviewed 1 of the 5 different games in the Best RPG category? With Entertainment Weekly, by the way, taking the cake because they reviewed 0, and yet they are a part of the jury. So lastly, let me wrap this up. Going back to the votes that the jurors get versus the fans, that 90% versus 10% split, let me read to you directly from the FAQ regarding why fans can get 100% of the vote. Now, I don't believe fans should get 100% of the vote, but just check this out. Creating a 100% fan vote presents several challenges. First, given that some games are exclusive to one platform, a public vote puts a single platform games at an inherent disadvantage over multi-platform titles. In addition, it is important that winners cannot be socially engineered in any way. We find that a blended vote is the most credible and authentic way to select winners. If winners cannot be socially engineered, then why did each juror, on average, only review half of the nominees? Why are some of the members allowed to be a part of the jury while barely having any coverage on any of the nominees? Why does one member of the jury get to be on the jury with absolutely no coverage in any of the nominees in the best RPG category? The answer is a negligent and poor jury selection process when more than half the jurors did not even touch or review Hogwarts Legacy. It's clear as day in this case that although winners cannot be socially engineered, losers can.